The Vice President of the Middle East and Africa Center at the United States Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C. What do you make of this session with the President and the Prime Minister? Did it go as well? Apparently it didn't go as well as he had expected. Did it go kind of how you thought it would?
I think that it did. I think that what's important is to really be emphasizing more of the long-term strategies when we're talking about Iraq. And, you know, there is a temptation to really look at the short term, and I think that's been a little bit of the focus, the demand for more support, the ability to defeat and degrade ISIS. But I think that for us to really have a productive meeting, we need to be focusing on more long-term strategies, which includes more inclusive government, more of a political process, but also the strong economic hardships that Iraq is facing across the country.
You and I have been on this broadcast talking before about long-term. This has been something that you've talked about. Your book, of course, tracing, I think it was 2003 to 2005, correct, what happened, and just kind of seeing, and I know you travel back there quite a bit and have seen this deterioration in attitudes over time. How would you kind of size up the situation there on the ground in Iraq now? We have a new prime minister. Have things changed at all?
I think that's really the question that we're looking at with the visit today. Have things changed? You've had the right type of rhetoric come out of the Prime Minister's office. There's been a promise to be more inclusive in terms of trying to bring in the Sunni bloc. There's been a commitment towards reconciliation, and you've also had...
Let me stop you there, because we've heard these promises before.
That was exactly where I was leading, is that we've heard these promises before. There's a real strong need for something actually that you can feel tangibly towards a difference. You've had better relationships in terms of with particularly fighting ISIS with the Kurdish regional government. But I think that you hit the hammer on the nail. We really want to see something more tangible beyond the rhetoric. And there still hasn't been very encouraging movements in that regards. Although, again, there's confidence that we have a counterpart who's listening, which I do think the Prime Minister is listening.
What about the fight against ISIL? How do you see that now?
I think that it's something that we're seeing consistently. I keep saying you take 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, 3 steps to the side. It's very hard to really say where we are with the fight with ISIS, which is why I'm consistently going back to long term. It really is the conditions that lead to the birth of ISIS, but also to the support or even to the neutrality of people around the ground in terms of ISIS. For Iraq, and I would say Syria and the region, to defeat this extremist ideology that has emerged, you really need popular support on the ground. And that can only happen if they have confidence in a government, and I think that's really what the Prime Minister needs to be able to do. We're not going to get that confidence in anything from the Syrian opposition or from Bashar al-Assad, so really there's a lot of need for it to emerge out of Iraq so that we have a real ally. You
mentioned confidence on the ground, and yet when a Prime Minister comes, they're not talking about that, they're talking about weapons and getting more weapons. Is Iraq, in a sense, kind of hamstrung because of its past performance? Of course, I remember back when Mosul fell to the ISIL rebels. I remember reading where some of the officers were interviewed afterwards, not officers, but soldiers, saying that the officers scattered. They had no orders, they had no leaders. Is there still the concern, you think, on the part of the United States? Do we really want to send weapons in there if ISIL is going to end up with them in the long run?
I think that there is a very strong concern. I think even beyond, let's assume that you had the best Iraqi army in place. What we've realized over and over is that there isn't a military solution to Iraq, particularly in terms of defeating an ideology that's as extreme as ISIL. You really need to be able to look at the political, the social, the economic grievances that are on the ground that ISIS is hijacking and taking advantage of. So you need to be able to strip those excuses away from them and really build more, again, of an inclusive government. I think that's absolutely key in terms of the situation of Iraq. Bring on board the Sunni tribes and have a real agreement with the Kurds.
You know what's interesting talking to you is I think we focus on the battles and maybe taking land, but I think it's the long-term stuff we really need to focus on. Manal, always a pleasure having you on the broadcast. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.